Scared somebody.
Scared somebody? All right. So Cleveland gets defeated for president for his second term, even though what? What did he win?
The popular vote?
He won the popular vote, but the popular vote doesn't mean diddly. Remember, it's the electoral vote that matters. So in this instance, Benjamin Harrison defeats him. Benjamin Harrison is related to William Henry Harrison. It was I believe it was his grandfather. I meant to look that up before the previous test, and of course, it's one of those things that I didn't get the chance to do. And he is going to be the president of a very Republican administration. Okay, it's going to be very, I mean Republican with a capital R. He is very beholden to big business and big business interests. He is going to be in charge when Wyoming and Idaho's applications to join the Union as states are pushed through, and they return, thanks to the favor of them coming in very quickly, Republican governments, capital R, meaning the political party. During his administration, a bill that was vetoed by Cleveland, the Dependent Pensions Act, is going to be reintroduced. And this time it is going to pass. This pension was money given to Civil War veterans for the remainder of their life, Union Civil War veterans, for the remainder of their lives, for their service. It took down the time of service down to as little as 9 weeks in the Grand Army of the Republic. And for the first time, it also included their wives. So wives would get their husbands' pensions after their husband died. Now, sometimes when we're preparing for lectures, you come across something that kind of strikes a chord in your brain, and you go back and you look something up. Take a guess when the last Civil War veteran's wife, United States Civil War veteran's wife, died. Take a guess. Taylor. Jennifer. Guess. Give me a year. 1910? Okay, great year. All right. You missed it by that much. When was the last Civil War? When did the last Civil War veteran's wife die? 2004. How the heck is that possible, you now ask me? This is how it was possible. She married her husband in 1920. He died 8 months later. She received his pension until she died in 2004, at like 98 years of age. All that time, she received a pension from the government for her husband who had fought in the Civil War. I'm pretty sure when they passed this bill, nobody thought that would be the case. Somebody's going to be alive 39 years after the Civil War ends. That's going to get some money for him. All right. Now, I say he's beholden to big business interests. Remember the Bland-Allison Act. It called for $2 to $4 million of silver to be purchased a month to be minted. And I said the Treasury would never mint that amount because why? What do you not want to do? You don't want to flood the market with more money because the more money on the market, in the market, it is worth less, right? Worth space less. And if you have too much money in the market, it is not just worth less, it is worthless. All right? So, big business forces the mining interests, the silverites, force the issue with the Bland-Allison Act. They force it again with the Sherman Silver Purchase Act in 1890. Now, in addition to that $2 to $4 million, they're going to buy an additional $4.5 million in silver per month. Remember that pile of silver that the mines keep making? Keep pulling out of the ground? And they want somebody to buy it. Who's going to buy it? Well, they found the perfect person to buy it. The government is going to buy it. Now, in addition to that, you will remember is with the Specie Resumption Act, it created a 1-to-1 ratio for greenbacks to be paid off with gold dollars. If you had $1 in greenbacks, you had $1. You would go into the bank and say, "Here is my greenback." You would get what? $1 in gold, correct?
What were the greenbacks again? Was that
Greenback was the, I don't have my wallet on me, but basically paper money.
Oh,
Okay? It's paper money. They're called greenbacks because the back of it was with green ink. It was popular to do at that time period. Texas, during the Revolution period, our money, we had two different types of money. One was called the T-back, the T-star, because it had a star on the back, and the other is a red back because the back was printed with red ink. It was just what they called it. It was called greenbacks. And the people who supported this policy of paper money were called greenbackers. Okay? So what happens now is if you walk in the store for Spencer, and you go in, you walk into the bank, and you have $10 worth of greenbacks under the Specie Resumption Act of 75, they would give you what? That amount, gold. 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 It's only gold. At that time period, it's only gold. Specie resumption. $1 in gold is worth a $1 greenback. Okay? But now we're buying all this silver, and what are we doing with it? We're just putting it over here to the side. We got to buy it because what? Because Congress says so. The silverites have said, we've got to buy this, we've got to buy this, we've got to buy this. And we are. And it's just going into this, this giant vault. But nobody's doing anything with it. So the silverites get the Sherman Silver Purchase Act done, and it says now silver can also be used to pay back your gold. Remember the 16-to-1 ratio when we went to the bimetal went back to bimetallism. Now you walk in, and instead of getting $1 of gold, they would give you $1 of silver. So instead of getting a gold coin, you might get, let's just be very vague, 16 silver coins. All right, one gold dollar equals 16 silver coins. Is what the ratio is established at. Why is the ratio established at that? Because government says so. Thank you, Alyssa. All right, so that is the first big boon to having Harrison as president. The second is going to come with the McKinley tariff. Remember, the tariff had been lowered, the mongrel tariff, because nobody knew what the heck was in it, had been lowered down to 35 to 42%. Now it's jacked back up to 48% on imports. Well, the tariff always hits one group of society the hardest. Who is that? What? Not manufacturers. No. Alberto, do you remember? Whenever we talked about this last semester, what did we talk about? Tariffs. Who does it hurt the most? It's stuff being imported. Who are the people importing things? Southerners, exactly right. Who are farmers, right? Because farmers do what? They grow their things, they ship it to market. Usually the market is overseas, and it goes over there. They have to pay a tax in England, all right? They pay the tax in England, so a tenth of their total income is gone. They buy their items, they have to come back over to the United States, and now on the items that are coming in, they have to pay 48%. So how much are they paying total? They pay 10% import fees to England, and now what? Total of 58, almost 60% of their total income is being eaten up by taxes. Hits the farmers the hardest, but what? Manufacturers like it. Why do manufacturers like it? Because it creates an artificial ceiling as to how much they can charge for their product without getting competitive. Okay? Back when I was about to turn 16, I wanted the coolest car in the world. It was a brand new I guess it would have been 1990 Nissan Pathfinder. Really, really cool. Right when SUVs were coming out. And the SUVs were the new thing. And the SUV I wanted, this is the reason I wanted it, okay? Follow, this is the reason I wanted this, was because the rear window looked like that. I mean, on the back side panel. Because I thought that was the coolest thing in the world. I was going to buy a car because of the back window. All right? But it's a two-door car. At that time period, Nissan and Toyota were flooding the market with cheap SUVs that the United States domestic car companies could not compete with. As a result, the government passed a tariff on two-door SUVs that were imported and made them more expensive. Okay? When I was growing up, GMC made this two-door SUV called a Jimmy. There was also the Bronco. There was the Bronco 2. You guys ever seen any of those? All right? You don't see them anymore because eventually the tariff was done away with. And then you have like the Explorer takes the place of, was it the Bronco was a Ford? I'm thinking. Yeah. So what happens is Nissan, instead of having to pay a tariff on these two-door vehicles, would come out with a four-door vehicle. So these were very hard to find. I actually ended up driving one, and I did not like it because like a box on wheels would bounce all over the place. I hated it, so I didn't get it. But that was, my first experience with the tariff. I wanted to get a vehicle, but I couldn't because the federal government said I needed to buy what? Domestic products, because a domestic SUV could not be sold at the same price as a Nissan Pathfinder. We still do that today. We still have these tariffs. They're not as great as they were back then because the government, let's put it this way. Okay. The tariff is marijuana to the government. Okay? What is marijuana often called of the drugs? It's the gateway drug. Okay? This is how the government gets its money. Okay? This is how the government is happy when it has a tariff. Ooh, getting money. But the big drug they're going to try to get their hands on, in the next lecture series is what? April 15th is coming up, and what do you have to do? Income tax. They want to tax your income. So they can tax your income. They've gone from marijuana to like heroin. Well, yeah, everybody's paying now. The more money the government has, the more money they can waste, right? Yes? I don't actually think the government uses this money to help you, right? And good. Some people would nod their heads no. Good. Don't have to worry about the burden here. So, what is going to happen here, let me make this slide a little bit different, is you're going to have a lot of new innovations that are going to occur that are really going to change society and set the stage for an unprecedented industrial revolution. The first thing we're going to talk about is the coreless steam engine. The coreless steam engine is invented in 1876 by George Henry Corliss. A steam engine is a giant engine that runs off of steam pressure. What happens now is no longer do you have to build your factory near a river. Remember when you were in 1301 and they talked about the differences between the north and the south, and factories go to the north instead of the south because all factories were run by what? Water power. They were run by water power, and as a result, you needed fast-moving rivers. Now, are there fast-moving rivers in the south? There's some. There's not many. I drove over quite a few of them this past summer. Went to Disney World. Okay. Went across the Mississippi, awfully wide, not very fast-moving. Went way down upon the Swanee River, far, far away. kind of neat when you go past that because they actually have the bars of the song written on the sign. If anybody here's a Alan Jackson fan, I went down yonder on the Chattahoochee. Nobody? Come on, that's the best song. And they're not fast-moving rivers. Why? Because the South, being agrarian, is very fertile and it's very lax. Okay? What makes water run faster? Hills. You don't really see many hills in that area. So factories were up north. Now that is going to change because now you can take a coreless engine, a steam engine, and power a factory anywhere. Because all it needs is water. It doesn't need fast-moving water to hit a water wheel to generate energy, to generate the power. Now another thing that's going to change invention is that the light bulb is going to be perfected by Thomas Edison. I used to say invented, but I've since come across some stuff recently that kind of shows that Thomas Edison was kind of a schmo. That he stole a lot of his ideas. And I'll say he perfected it. No, he just perfected it. Yeah. He just made it efficient and made it cheap.
He got it from this guy. Like, I can't remember his name.
Tesla?
Yeah.
Nikola Tesla, yeah. Alexander Graham Bell creates the telephone in 1876. And perhaps the greatest invention that is going to revolutionize society is steel is going to be made exceptionally cheap. See, steel is very expensive to make at this time period. If you had something made of steel, it was probably the most expensive thing that you could get because it was very hard to make. It was only made in short batches. Okay, so the alloys of steel are all put together. The alloys to make the steel are all put together and they're smelted. Okay, we melt it down. This giant pot, and it's like a vat, huge. And what happens is it's poured in there and it gets boiling. It boils. And what happens is it has all these impurities. And these impurities are very difficult to get out. And these impurities affect the structural integrity of the steel once it is cast. How many guys have ever seen a sword made? A sword made like maybe at the Renaissance Festival or something like that. What do?
They fold it over.
That's right. They pull it out. They fold it over. They get it pulled out of a furnace. They bang on it. They what they're doing when they're banging it is they're getting rid of all of the bubbles, and they're trying to break out the impurities. And then they will fold it over, and they will bang it out again. You got to fold it all over itself, and then they'll put it back in, heat it up again, and come out. And they'll do that for some of the greatest swords are the Japanese katanas that they still don't know how they made because they're not supposed to have the technology. I always love that. We don't have the technology, so neither do they. Maybe we've lost that technology. Maybe we've lost that ability to do it. My favorite thing is sailing ships. Sailing ships used to be built by shipwrights. And they would build a ship without any blueprints. And they would go across the ocean on something that somebody just drew up in his mind and put down. How many of you guys would do that today? No. All right? So what happens is let's get all colorful here, as this steel is boiling here, he discovered that the impurities came to the surface. And as they came to the surface, they just congregated at the top. One day, he saw a man using a fan to cool himself, and this fan was blowing across one of these vats. And as it blew across this vat, he noticed the impurities as they came to the surface were pushed over to the side. So what happened is he said, hey, if I took the impurities out from that side as they came up, once there stopped being impurities coming up, that would be pure. Okay? It's called the Bessemer process. because it's named after Henry Bessemer. Because of this, steel, the manufacturing of steel is going to drop 81% in price. All right? 81%, straight down. In 1859, Colonel Edwin Drake in Titusville, Pennsylvania, is going to construct and successfully drill the first oil well. Now, oil had been around for a while. There are reports of people walking around in areas, especially like in Texas, in Beaumont, this area called Spindletop, in which it just seemed like this gunk was just coming out of the ground. That there's A, where there's no use for it, and B, there was no way to harvest it. 1859, when Drake drills the first oil well, there's about 2 million gallons of oil being harvested a year. By 1890, that number was 50 million. At first, it is going to be used as an illuminant, because we don't have cars to put it in yet. But eventually it is going to become used for cars. It's an illuminant, it's a lubricant. Some people would use it as a medicine. I'm a snake oil salesman. My wife and I have this friend that's just kind of odd. She follows her on Facebook. I don't anymore because, sometimes you can tell when families are just heading for disaster. You let your children do crazy things, and you're like, that's just going to be problematic down the road. And last night, this lady was posting that her daughter was ill, so she put like vanilla bean extract on her ear and something on her brow and something around her body to draw out the infections. And Sarah looks at me, and I was sitting right next to her on the couch, and I saw that, and I'm like, I'm a good boy. For some people that think that, it's the same thing. It's the same people who bought into this concept of, drink this oil that came out of the ground. It's all natural, therefore it's good for you. Yeah, sure. Sure it is. So all these things together are going to lend itself to this huge business expansion. This is the Flatiron Building in New York. Who's been to New York? Who has been to the top of the Empire State Building? Okay. When you're at the top of the Empire State Building, did you do the tours? The little audio tour thing? No? Yes?
No, it's the thing that went up and I just walked around it.
You just walked around it? Okay. Well, if you looked down, you saw a strange building. And from up high, it looked kind of like a triangle. That's terrible. Yeah, I know. I am a historian, not an artist. Okay? There we go. It looks like that from up high. It's the Flatiron Building.
It looks like a triangle, but...
This is what it looks like. See, if you were to look, this is one side of it. Okay? And it's kind of like this. All right? And it's curved. It's usually it's usually used in movies as an apartment complex. I think I remember it in the movie Sliver, which was a movie back in the 90s. It was a really bad Sharon Stone movie, type of thing. But it was there. But nobody knows who built it. But what we do know is that when it was built, it was the largest building in the world. It was 7 stories tall. Why was it the largest building in the world? It's kind of funny. Go to the top of the Empire State Building, not the largest building in the world, and you look down like 70, 80, 90 stories to it, right? Why was it the biggest building in the world? Tallest. Why? Steel. You can build with steel now. You can go up. Prior to that, you had iron and iron is not good for building because there's only so much you can do before it starts crumbling. Wooden buildings, usually you don't see wooden buildings larger than 2 stories. The Industrial Revolution is going to spur the growth of the time period we call big business. All those things that I talked about, oil, manufacturing, the coreless steam engine, the telephone, they're all going to change. Railroads. By the 1880s, the panic that had been caused in part by the railroads extending too far, people had caught up to them now, and they were actually starting to turn a profit. Or they were purchased by other railroad companies and brought into their system. So if they were not being used, if you're taking a $20,000 debt and you don't have $20,000 to pay for it, you're going to go out of business. But if you have a company that's worth $2 million, $20,000 isn't that big of a write-off. Okay? Eventually, and this is what happens in any panic, we expand when business is good and times are good, and then all of a sudden it collapses on us. And when it collapses on us, we have too much infrastructure, and then eventually we'll catch back up. Okay? That's just how it goes. Another major issue that really drives in the Industrial Revolution is for the early part of the Industrial Revolution, starting in the 18 teens, is the major impediment to industrial progress was the South. The South viewed anything other than agrarian development as contrary to being good for the United States. Okay? They wanted to export things. Let's grow it and export. Let's grow it and export. We've got all this land. Let's do that. Okay? Civil War occurs. South is gone. Those shackles placed on the government by the South are gone. The North can do whatever they want and get away with it. So you see all this business expansion occurring up north during the Civil War. You have a demand for things. You need rifles. You need bullets. You need uniforms. You need supplies. You need gunpowder. All of these things are going to be supplied by industry in the north. By the time we get to the late 1870s and early 1880s, industry is now going to start coming down into the south. But for the most part, it is due to the coreless steam engine, where it used to be that you would take your cotton, you'd grow your cotton, you'd harvest it, you'd take it, you'd put it on a train, you'd send it up to New York if it was going to stay domestic, and then they would then convert that to thread and then make it into fabric. Now what you can do is you have that textile factory right next to your cotton field. So you go, you cut your cotton, you throw it into the textile, and then boom, out comes your finished product. Why? Because you're not beholden on water-powered technology. You can put it anywhere. In addition, the South has a large number of cheap laborers. Who are they? They're what? That does play a part, but it's not as big as this group of people I'm talking about. Yes, sir. The freed slaves. Those freedmen are cheap laborers, and they are willing to work. Technology is going to be incorporated to help manufacturing processes. The light bulb. How does the light bulb enhance manufacturing? You can work at night. That's right. You can work longer hours. You're not beholden to the sun anymore for how long that you work. Instead of an 8-hour day, in which the sun is up, 8 to 12 hours a day you can work. Does pay go up with it? No, it doesn't. It is possible for one person to oversee numerous factories in different towns and different cities now, thanks to the invention of a telephone. Any problem, you can pick up the phone, call your boss can tell you what to do, and then you do it, and the problem's fixed. The bad part of that is that the distance between the factory owner and the laborer grows. As a result, there is a disconnect between the two. During the Depression of '73, you're going to see smaller companies that go bankrupt get bought up by their competitors. And there are two ways that this occurs. And I'm going to use two examples here. One is John D. Rockefeller. The other is Andrew Carnegie. The first one is horizontal integration. John D. Rockefeller creates a company called Standard Oil. He owns refineries. Okay, he owns one refinery, but guess what? Where he's at, there's numerous refineries. But they went out of business. What he does is he goes and he buys them up. And he adds them to his stable. All these factories he has purchased. They are all his, and pretty soon he is going to control all of the oil production in a given area. This is called horizontal integration because they are all they are all the same aspect of manufacturing. Okay? They're all what? Factories. Horizontal, across the board. Now, eventually, when cars become popular, he's going to start buying up gas stations. Okay? And he's going to own all the gas stations in a certain area. Who's from Dallas? Okay? In Dallas, there is this building, downtown Dallas, that has an animal on top of it. What is it? It's what?
I don't know.
Don't know. Does anybody know what it is? There's a giant animal in this building in Dallas. What? No. It's a Pegasus. It's the symbol for Mobile Oil. Okay? Mobile Oil is what Standard Oil became. Also, you probably passed the other thing that Standard Oil became on the way here today. I know we don't have many mobile oil stations, but if you have a mobile oil gas card, it has another name on it too. And they want you to put a tiger in your tank. Exxon. All of the stations that he bought up eventually became Exxon and Mobil stations. That is horizontal integration. Now, this right here, if he was to purchase, and he does eventually, make this connection to, up and down, that is no longer horizontal, it is vertical. Vertical integration is when you purchase and control every aspect of your industry. So instead of using oil, let's use the man who pioneered it. That is Andrew Carnegie with steel, the American Steel Corporation. What he did is he bought the mine in which coal is and iron ore is dug out, and then he owns the trucks and trains that deliver it, to the factory that smelts it down. See, it's called a foundry. To the trains that deliver his steel, to the build site to where they're building. Every aspect, from who owns the ground that it's dug from, to transports it to the foundry, to that smelts it down, to casts it, to delivering it, is known as vertical integration. And that is what Andrew Carnegie is going to do with his steel corporation. All right? So you have horizontal and you have vertical. Get these two big and they become what? They can become monopolies. It means you own the entire market. Back when I was growing up, AT&T was busted for being a monopoly. It was busted up into all these different companies. Ma Bell, Southwestern Bell, that's what we had. You had Bell Pacific, you had Bell, New York Bell, things like that. And it was all busted up by the governments and these other organizations. About 10 years ago, Microsoft was being charged with being a monopoly. Why would Microsoft be charged with being a monopoly? If you buy a computer, a PC, what does it have on it? It has Windows on it. Do you have any choice in that matter? No. And different companies were suing. Like one was Sun, which did at the time Java. Was suing, and it got thrown out. I remember this one example of a judge asking the president of Sun Computers, how do you know it's a monopoly? He says, if I may. He turns around and he says to the crowd behind him, how many of you have Windows on your computer? And every single hand went up. He said, sir, that's a monopoly. And because what? You have to have it. Now, today, Macintosh has gotten, back then Mac was like 3% of the market. I think it's up to about 10 to 15%. Well, what's happening is these companies are growing so big that they are encompassing the entire market. This is the area in which a new word is introduced to the American language, and that word is millionaire. It's never been around before. Rockefeller is going to be the richest man in the world. He is a millionaire. Carnegie is going to be a millionaire. When Carnegie dies, his will gives all his money away. He wanted his family to earn their money the way that he had. Any of you from small towns that have a Carnegie library? Well, there's one in Franklin, there's one in Bryan over downtown. And it was paid for by Carnegie in his will. So what happens is you get these companies with lots of money. Now, if you've seen the movie Wolf of Wall Street, okay, if you've seen that, that's out right now. The guy has more dollars than he has cents. And he spends his money on just crazy things. The last class I was taught, I used an example of Vince Young. Vince Young was the Longhorn quarterback, won the national championship, I want to say like 2006. Okay? He wins a Heisman, gets drafted, and goes and plays for the Titans. All right? Plays for the Titans, makes $20, $30 million a year. A lot. He gets cut by the Titans, and he is now like $18, $20 million in debt. How did he go from making that amount of money to being that amount of money in debt? You have more money than cents. More dollars than cents, is what I like to put it. Okay? He would do stupid things. I was talking to my son about this just last night. One of the things that he would do is one time he wanted to fly from point A to point B and didn't want to share the plane with anyone else. This is a jumbo commercial jetliner. He bought up every other seat in the airplane, so he would not have to share it with anyone. Okay? That's a misuse of money. So what happens is these people are going to say, we've got a lot of money that we really can't invest in more infrastructure at this time period. So we need to figure out a way that we can invest this money at the same time make more money. So what you see is the creation of an organization called trusts. A trust is a company that makes no product but owns other companies. That's what they do. They make money by owning other companies, and then any profits that they make is in turn used to invest into other companies. They're called holding companies. Now, in many instances, these companies would create monopolies because they would create a trust when they were forbidden from buying up more gas stations, more foundries. Because they're not owning it, it's another company owning it. Now, that kind of runs against a lot of state laws. However, New Jersey didn't have a problem with this. New Jersey was interested in having business instead of ethics in their economy. So many of these trust companies would be created in New Jersey because state laws would not affect them. New York cannot sue a company that is in New Jersey for violating a New York law. You follow? That makes sense to you? Okay. I want to touch on for a moment this problem with farmers, because the farmers are really going to be hit the hardest by these tariffs, by the industrialization, and even by the monopolies. Because when you have a monopoly, when you guys played the game Monopoly, what happens when you own the entire, all of one color? You make a lot more money, and then what happens? You can build houses, and you build the 4 houses, and then you build a hotel. If you own Boardwalk or Park Place, you land on one of those, and they have a hotel. It's a lot of money, and you'll probably go bankrupt unless you have that. Okay? The problem is, when you have a monopoly on something, you can say, this is the amount of money it is going to cost for you to get this item. And if you need that item, you have no recourse but to pay. At the time period, the farmers are going to be the most hit by the tariffs and the monopolies. At first, historically, farmers had very little money. Most of the things that they did, they got through barter or trade. Trade, hey, I need a cow, here's a pig. Barter is you go to the your general store and you say, I'm going to give you this pig, give me some, use it onto my account. If a pig's going for $100 and you need $30 worth of goods, the merchant would ring up, okay, on your account I got $70 left. For the most part, he was left to his own devices. Most farming was subsistence farming. You farmed for what you needed to survive. Now, in the 1830s and 1850s, in that time period, things are going to start changing. You're going to see things introduced, like the plow. In the 1890s, you're going to see this thing called a John Deere tractor. That's going to revolutionize how much you can do in a planting season. With more people moving to the places like Chicago, New York, Pittsburgh, that are not involved in farming, you are going to see the farmer be put under, I don't want to say under economic pressure, but the farmer is going to see an economic opportunity thanks to the invention of these new devices to plant more and get out of the market of being a subsistence farmer to being a farmer who also sells off a good portion of his crops to make money. Now, in order to do this, you have to have more land. If you have more land, how are you going to get it? How are you going to get more land if you don't have money? A loan. Where do loans come from? Got a bank. Okay, so you got the farmer right here. You got a small bank. Okay, where does the small bank get its money from? Get what?
Big bank.
You get it from a big bank. That's right. You get it from a big bank. Where do big banks get their money from? Eventually, they're going to get their money from the U.S. government. So what happens is when the government experiences a panic and the economy experiences a panic, the big bank is going to say, hey, we need our money. And they're going to go down to the small bank, and the small bank is going to say, hey, we need our money from the farmer. The farmer says, I don't have your money because it's invested in this land I bought, and it is in these crops that are growing. So what is going to happen is the small banks are going to say, okay, well, we're foreclosing on your land, and now you can't live there anymore. You can't grow your food. And if you can't grow your food, you're going to go into debt. If you're going to go into debt, you have no way to pay it off. So what happens is any form of market volatility that is going to occur during this time is going to affect the farmers the hardest. This is the group that is hit the worst. Now, let's look at the typical southern farmer. They're usually illiterate. They're exceptionally poor. They didn't own their land. You'll remember when we talked about Reconstruction. What they had was they were tenant farmers or sharecroppers. And that meant that somebody else owned their land. And that land had to be paid for. So what would occur is that when the crops came in, the tenant, the person who owned the land that you were farming, would take, in many instances, a third of your profits, a third of your crop. You were never going to get out of this situation. And because of the situations that they lived in, they often suffered from diseases that were quite common. Hookworm, which is just a disease that you get you get worms from being barefoot. My wife freaks out because every summer I walk around barefoot. Never probably had a problem before yet, but freaks her out. Pellagra, which is a disease that comes from being malnourished. And then, of course, tuberculosis. Tuberculosis is, remember how I talked about Doc Holliday? He had tuberculosis. They call it consumption back then. But tuberculosis is an infection of your lungs, very contagious, in which you basically cough yourself to death. You have blood in your lungs that basically you really cough yourself to death. And because in the South, of the Solid South system, they had no voice. They had no political presence. The Democrats did not want anything to do with them because they feared that if they gave the voice or gave a say to the poor farmer, it would also allow the African Americans a voice as well. They did not want that. Now I know what you're saying. Well, wait a minute. The 15th Amendment gives African Americans the right to vote. Yes, that is actually true, and it is. But the thing that you also need to understand is there is something that occurs before the elections, and that is either the convention in which a delegate is chosen or the primary in which a delegate is chosen. And for the most part, whoever in the South won those won the elections later. And they did not allow white people or African Americans to vote in those issues, in those conventions, or later the primaries. So the farmer is going to get, the farmer's got a bum rap. If there is the lowest rung on the ladder of the United States society, it is the farmer. Okay? The farmers have it worse than anyone else. And now they are going to get hit even harder. In the Midwest, the wet spell ends. The government is giving away land that people are foolishly going out and taking sight unseen. They're moving out there to get this free land. To make matters worse, the railroads are sending them out there, falsely advertising that this is a green, lush land. They get out there, and there's an excellent scene in this John Wayne movie. I think I talked about it earlier, McClintock, where this guy is a railroad promoter, and he's taking people down to, I think it is like supposed to be around El Paso. And these people are coming down to El Paso, and they have left their way of life. They're moving out there, and they're going to start planting. When you think of El Paso, do you think of crops? And John Wayne gets up there and says, "Hey, all you people, you need to get back on this train and leave. The railroad and the government have said this is land that's perfect for you, and it isn't. It's terrible. It's only good for one thing, and that is cattle. And you don't have the money to do it, so you just need to leave." And it's a great scene because then the dandy, there's always a dandy that opposes John Wayne, says, "Oh, listen to him. He just owns this land. He wants to buy your land because he's the biggest rancher there is." He's like, "Yeah, I'm the biggest rancher there is because I have cattle." You know, that's what God made this country for. Cattle, not crops. Another problem was credit was very easy to get before the panic. Credit is very easy to get when money is good, and guess what? It's terrible to pay off when you don't have any cash. Something that happens with the United States that's going to happen from now until World War II is that when another nation in Europe or other nations in Europe fight, we will step in and provide both those nations the crops that they need that they can no longer make for themselves because they are fighting. Okay, so when France and Germany go to war, who provides them with the crops that they need? We do. The problem is that eventually those two nations stop fighting. And when they stop fighting, what also occurs? They start planting again. And as a result, the farmers get hit hard because the farmers, when money is good, are going to do what they think they should do, and that is expand. Okay, because money's good, but guess what? Money's not always going to be good, and then they're left holding this huge amount of debt, and they can't pay off. As a result, bankruptcies and foreclosed land are exceptionally common for the farmers. Nationwide, two unions would start off localized, and these are agrarian unions, and they're called the Farmers Alliance. The Southern Alliance originated in Texas. It's founded by Dr. C.W. McCune. The Northern Alliance would be founded by Milton George in 1880. Eventually they would become political in the 1890s. And what they would do is they would work to control railroads, bankers, and middlemen through legislation. This would be the birth of what is known as the populist organization. We'll talk more about that later. This election goes up through 1892, and I don't want to go into that aspect, because in 1892 the populists really start making a name for themselves. although they would work to try to control legislation, they would not be as successful as another group that has similar aspects that are going to make the first real victories for farmers. And this is known as the Grange, also is the National. No, its actual The actual title is the National Grange, or the Patrons of Husbandry, created by Oliver H. Kelly. Originally, its goal was to create an organization to share knowledge of scientific farming with farmers. Anybody a farmer in here? Anybody's family a farmer in here? You know, if I would have asked that question 100 years ago, 90% of the hands would have gone up. In Texas, in 1900, 90% of the total population was involved in farming. By 1970, it was 10%. What does it mean by scientific farming? What does that mean, scientific farming?
Like, don't they use chemicals?
What?
Would they use chemicals or develop new ideas?
Fertilizer, early forms of fertilizer. What was the big problem with growing tobacco originally? What is the problem with growing tobacco? The what? A virus? No. What is it? It sucks the nutrients out of the land. I mean, it actually just completely grow 2 or 3 crops of tobacco, and that ground is worthless. Okay? So what happens is that's why originally you see the original movements west of a lot of people, because they used the ground until it was worthless. They didn't know about fertilizing. And now what you see farmers do is they will plant a crop on a certain field, and then they will stop and they will move to another field, and they will just rotate it. And it's crop rotation. And what it does is it allows that one field to regain its nutrients. Okay? That's an example of scientific farming. Something that, what is science? Science is observing and measuring and making judgments, right? Okay. And that's what they're doing. They said, hey, if I plant this land this way, I notice my crop the second year isn't as good. I need to move somewhere else, and what happens if I go back and plant it later? But eventually they're going to get into, the Grange is going to start taking on different issues. One of them is going to be what is known as the middleman. Listen to this. This is a quote by a farmer. There are 3 crops in Nebraska. One is corn, one is grapes, and one is interest. One is produced by the sweat of farmers, and the others by men who sit in their offices. Okay? So there's three things produced in Nebraska. There's crops, which somebody actually gets out there and works on. There's freight, which is the amount of money somebody pays you to do what? I mean, it's the amount of money that you pay to get your goods to market. And third, interest that somebody makes just because they loaned you money. So what they're trying to do is they're going to try to cut out, first is the middleman. Okay? What is an example of the middleman? Okay? The person that's selling it. Okay, so let's say, here's the factory. I used to work in Walmart. When I was growing in college, I didn't put myself in college. I worked all my entire collegiate term time at Walmart. And they had this book that you would, it showed you how much everything was really worth. And it was kind of neat to see how much things were really worth. And how many of you guys have ever played with one of those really big balls from, inflatable balls from Walmart? They're about this big, right? Those had just come on the scene when I was at Walmart. And they sold for like $3.99, okay? Still about $3.99 because I bought one a couple years ago for my kids. How much did that cost to make? 10 cents. It cost 10 cents, and Walmart marked it up to what? $3.99. Okay, so here, Walmart is the middleman. Okay, they buy from the factory. Walmart marks it up, and then here's you having to pay $4. Okay, because now you know how much it really is. Like, why shouldn't I pay 10 cents? Well, there's other things involved there that you have to get. I mean, you have to pay. You have to pay to get it here. You have to pay to ship it. You have to pay the workers. You have to know, and they have shareholders, so they want to make some money. So this is what happens. The Grange says, well, what if we owned Walmart, or we owned the company that distributed the things, instead of the equivalent of Walmart at that time was the general store? What if we owned it instead of the general store, and we were together cooperating and shared the amount of money? It's called a cooperative. Now you said your family's a farm. You've been to a co-op. What is a co-op? A co-op is a business owned by the farmers. And any profit that is made is shared cooperative because they all cooperate. How many guys have ever seen a silo? Okay. My wife's family was farmers up in Dumas, Texas, an hour north of Amarillo. And when you're about 20 miles outside of Amarillo, you can see the silos of Dumas. And so what happened is her dad, when he was farming, he would bring his grain in and take it to the silo, and they would basically suck it up into the silo, and then he would eventually get paid for it. Well, does that silo have his last name on it? This is the Ritchie silo? Does it? No. It's a cooperative silo, and when the grain is sold, depending on how much you put in, you got a portion of that money. Okay? You cooperate and cut out the middleman. Now, this is what the Grange evolved into. The problem is that it is not going to go very well in the first go-round for the co-ops because these are farmers. They're not merchants. They don't know what they're doing, and they collapse. They're just not efficient, and they can't make the work. However, it does start. They also try to regulate the railroads. See, railroads were charging any rate that they wanted. How many guys have ever ridden in a taxi? You ride in a taxi, on the side of the taxi, before you get in, there's a sign. What does it say? It's the rates. It'll say like $2 the first mile, 25 cents every mile after that, right? Okay. That is a rate that is established by either the state or the county or the city, whoever is regulating taxis in that area. And they have to pay that rate. You have to pay that rate. You don't want to be charged like $30 or whatever. You don't want to be charged too much. So what was happening at this time period is there was no regulation on railroads. So if you were going from San Francisco to New York, and you were on one railroad, it's very possible that you may have paid a cheaper rate per mile than you were paying from Houston to Austin. You would pay more for shorter routes than you would for longer routes. Why? Because that's what the railroad charged, and there was no regulation on that. So what would happen is the Grange would organize and sue two companies that would get to the Supreme Court. And these are known as the Granger cases. The first is Munn versus Illinois of 1887, and the second is Pell versus Chicago and Northwestern Railroad. The Grange loses both of these cases, but sometimes a loss can result in a victory. All right? A loss can result in a victory. Well, what do I mean by that? Although the Supreme Court did not agree with their arguments, they did agree that a business open to the public must be open to regulation. Okay? If you're going to be open to the public, you must be open to regulation. You have to be regulated, or you must be able to be regulated. So, although they do not win their cases, they win a larger issue. And that is, railroads open for public use must be publicly regulated if somebody chose to do so. All right? We're out of time. We'll stop there, and we'll pick up there on Tuesday. You guys have a good weekend.